November 1939, as Europe descended into war, the strategic thinkers of air power from Italy's Giulio Douhet to America's Billy Mitchell had long theorized a decisive blow. Their vision, bombardment from the skies, striking deep into the enemy's heartland, destroying their will to fight, and crippling their industrial might. General H.H. Arnold, Chief of the Army Air Forces, embraced this doctrine, believing in the inherent strength of American bombers. He saw the flying fortress, the B-17, as an armored knight of the air, capable of self-defense and flying unescorted. This was the bedrock of American bombing philosophy: precision, daylight, and without the need for fighter cover. Yet, this foundational belief, a dangerous myth, would soon collide with the brutal reality of aerial combat. Late 1942, the first American heavy bombers arrived in England, full of optimism. Initial raids, like those over Rouen, seemed to validate the theory. "We ruined Rouen," boasted the crews. But this early cakewalk was deceptive. As the 8th Air Force pushed deeper into German-occupied Europe, the Luftwaffe's formidable defenses began to extract a horrific toll. The primitive German Metox receiver, an early radar, alerted their fighters, and the sheer numbers of interceptors waiting for the bomber streams was unprecedented. October 10, 1943, the Munster raid. It was like flying into hell. The 100th Bomb Group, the Bloody 100th, sent 13 aircraft. Only one returned. Its pilot, Robert Rosenthal, later recalled the air filled with flaming debris. Such missions quickly dispelled any illusion of bomber invincibility. Pilots spoke of red balls, the cannon fire from relentless fighter attacks. The air above Germany became a killing field. The human body was not designed for the extreme altitudes and cold. Frostbite was common. Aerotitus media, a painful ear condition, prevailed. And the psychological strain, the constant terror of enemy fire, manifested in devastating ways. Airmen became flak-happy, their nerves shattered. Many were war-weary, suffering from flying fatigue or operational fatigue. A central medical establishment study found 44% of airmen suffered symptoms of combat stress and 99% experienced psychological strain. Over 1,200 were permanently grounded. The initial belief that such emotional casualties indicated a lack of moral fiber was slowly debunked. Studies like psychiatric experiences of the 8th Air Force, first year of combat, revealed combat exhaustion to be a predictable, debilitating consequence of unending, intense stress. It forced a redefinition of courage, not just bravery, but the sheer, unimaginable will to continue flying, day after day, into that inferno. Late 1944, as the war progressed, so did the nature of the air campaign. Hitler's fight-to-the-finish orders and fierce German resistance on the Western Front convinced Allied leadership that more decisive actions were needed to hasten the end of the war. The relentless V-2 rocket attacks on British cities fueled a desire for retaliation, while the rapid Soviet advance towards Berlin created a strategic urgency. President Roosevelt himself believed the entire German nation was responsible for the war and sought to impress upon them the totality of their defeat. General Hap Arnold, Chief of Air Force Staff, impatient to end the conflict, pressured commanders like General Karl Spaatz for more aggressive, even unconventional tactics. The British had long advocated area bombing, a conceptual shift towards morale bombing first proposed in July 1944 as the Thunderclap Plan, an all-out attack on German civilian morale. Though initially opposed by the US, the strategic and political pressures were becoming insurmountable. January 30, 1945, an urgent directive for a massive raid on Berlin was issued to General Doolittle. This was a pivotal moment. February 3, 1945, the 8th Air Force's raid on Berlin. More than 900 fortresses and over half as many escort fighters were dispatched, the largest force ever sent against a single city, their aiming point, the civilian center of Berlin, including railway passenger stations overflowing with refugees. With this mission, many historians now argue, the moral threshold had been crossed. The long-standing restraint against the indiscriminate killing of non-combatants was abandoned. It was a shift in Allied military policy, a devastating new approach to warfare. Over 120,000 people were made homeless in that single raid. Just 10 days later, February 13, 1945, Dresden, a city historically and artistically significant, perceived by many as undefended. It was about to endure a catastrophic fate. Two waves of RAF Lancasters, over 800 bombers, approached the beautiful river town. Their crews were trained to create city-consuming fires. The target, a routine incendiary mission that happened to go exactly right. The raid used a lethal mixture of explosives and incendiary mission. Explosives to collapse buildings, sever water mains, and create craters. Incendiaries to ignite the exposed structures. Then, more explosives to blow out windows and doors, creating drafts that would allow smaller fires to spread and merge into an unstoppable conflagration. The 4-pound magnesium canisters, thermite-filled incendiaries, were the great killers of the night, causing over 5 times more damage and death than conventional iron bombs. February 14, 1945. The next day, 311 American fortresses returned. They dropped 771 tons of this deadly cocktail. 60% explosives to 40% incendiaries. This ratio was designed for area, not precision, raids. Their primary targets included the Friedrichstadt marshalling yard and passenger station, but also industrial neighborhoods and at least 3 compact residential areas. Targets were often obscured by clouds and the drifting black haze from the previous night's fires, forcing reliance on radar. Bombs sometimes fell 8 to 10 miles beyond the target. Dresden's firestorm incinerated or suffocated at least 35,000 people. The city was packed with several 100,000 refugees. Kurt Vonnegut, an American POD housed in a pig shelter, would later describe the city as like the moon now. Historian Richard Taylor described the bombing pattern as if the enemy had anticipated the Dresdeners' every move and then killed them like cattle cunningly driven into holding pens. The fires kept burning for weeks. Liselott Klemich recalled bodies being swept together and burned in the marketplace by SS extermination experts using benzene and iron grates, a process survivors termed corpse mining. The widespread claim that P-51 Mustang's machine gun survivors on the Elbe Meadows has been depart. No German or American records support this. The 20th Fighter Group, allegedly involved, was actually bombing Prague that day, mistaking it for Dresden. General George Marshall, anxious to shift resources to the Pacific, advocated for morale bombing of cities like Munich and those along the Berlin-Leipzig-Dresden rail nexus. Even Churchill, who initially opposed Thunderclap, expressed impatience for decisive action against German cities. By February 1945, the Americans planned to hit Germany harder than ever before. March 1945 would see the peak of this air offensive, with almost 170,000 tons of bombs dropped on Germany, 102,000 of them by Americans. This scale of destruction raised profound questions about the ethical limits of warfare. General George MacDonald, in a remarkable internal communication, vehemently protested directives to bomb eastern German cities, characterizing them as area bombardment of congested civil populations without decisive strategic benefit. The Clarion operation of February 22 involved 3,500 bombers and 5,000 fighters, targeting undefended or lightly defended targets, rail yards, stations, bridges, vehicles, canal barges. The explicit goal was to terrorize civilians. It was an escalation that revealed deep divisions within Allied Air Command. Winter 1944, spring 1945. While the shock and awe of city destruction was immediate, the economic impact of strategic bombing was far more insidious and ultimately decisive. Early Nazi Germany had pursued a blitzkrieg economy, prioritizing short-term victories and avoiding deep civilian sacrifice. This theory, based on post-war interviews with Albert Speer and data from Rolf Wagenfuhr, suggested Germany was initially half-hearted in its war mobilization. Speer claimed Hitler believed Soviet resistance would collapse quickly, leading to factory hands working only one shift and women not being recruited. Speer's appointment in February 1942, it was argued, ushered in all-out mobilization. However, modern scholars like Richard Overy and Williamson Murray have challenged this blitzkrieg economy myth. They argue Germany was consistently preparing for global war from the mid-1930s, with significant cutbacks in consumer production by 1939. Speer's miracle was not creating a war economy from scratch, but efficiently optimizing and exploiting resources already committed to total war. including nearly 8 million foreign and slave laborers. The real Achilles heels of the German war effort were oil and transportation. By early 1945, synthetic oil production was at 6% of normal. Aviation gasoline production had stopped, clipping the wings of the Luftwaffe and impairing Wehrmacht mobility. Germany's river and canal networks were disabled. Its rail system lay in ruins. The slow strangulation of rail and river systems was probably the greatest single cause of Germany's economic collapse. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey, USBSS, a massive post-war effort spearheaded by General Frederick Anderson and staffed by brilliant minds like John Kenneth Galbraith, Paul Nitze, and George Boll, set out to objectively analyze the impact of the air war. Anderson's field excursions in post-war Germany revealed a land of utter devastation. Cities were a shambles, seemingly without a roof intact, like Pompeii magnified, just miles of rust staring to the sky. He saw an enormous desert of iron skeletons and felt a feeling of horror. Nothing is left. USBSS teams braved enemy fire to recover millions of documents from mineshafts, graveyards, and bombed-out offices. They interviewed Speer, Wagenführer, Luftwaffe ace Adolf Galland, and questioned nearly 4,000 German civilians. The USBSS concluded, "No nation can prevail under the full-scale and free exploitation of air weapons over the heart of its territory." By early 1945, Germany did not have one industrial economy. Despite this, the survey's findings were often misinterpreted by critics as evidence that bombing failed to hinder German war production. The nuanced reality of profound economic disruption was overshadowed by simplistic narratives. German officials themselves assessed that without Allied bombing, Germany might have produced 36% more tanks, 31% more military aircraft, and 42% more trucks in the previous year alone. The Anglo-American air offensive German historian Horst Bugge was decisive. The home front, apathy, not revolutions. The overwhelming destruction inflicted on German cities, with 128 square miles of urban space destroyed and between 500,000 and 600,000 non-combatants perishing, had a profound impact on the populace. 25 million Germans, nearly half the industrial workforce, were bombed heavily. 20 million were made homeless. While proponents of terror bombing hoped for mass revolt or quick surrender, the reality was more complex. Nazi propaganda claimed bombing strengthened German resolve. However, mood reports from the Nazi Party Security Service painted a different picture. Overwhelmed by elementary problems of existence, citizens lacked the time or the energy to engage in preparation for revolution. They retreated into a war of the vegetative neurosis, a widespread lethargy, pessimism, and mental depression. The slogan "Bu Blebu Brig," "Be a survivor," became the prevailing sentiment. Ursula von Kardorf's diaries recounted friends retreating into private life, focused only on survival, tiles for the roof or some cardboard for the windows. Faith in leaders, even the Führer, declined. Goebbels' propaganda had the opposite effect. As Arthur Harris himself noted, concentration camps were nearby. Dissent was ruthlessly suppressed. Defeatism was a crime, punishable by hanging from lampposts. Workers continued to labor, driven by fear, habit, or the lack of realistic alternatives. Yet, the bombing acted as a second front in the air. The Luftwaffe's fighter force was severely depleted, defending the homeland. Over 800,000 military personnel were mobilized for air defense, along with millions of civilians. This diversion of resources directly weakened Germany's capacity on other fronts, particularly the Eastern Front. General Alfred Jodli later testified that the bombing eliminated the soldiers' belief in protecting their homeland, leading to a realization of futility and a decrease in enthusiasm for fighting. March, April 1945. The final onslaught, Germany's last-ditch efforts to counter Allied air supremacy were formidable, but ultimately futile. The Mi-262 jet fighters, appearing in numbers in February 1945, were revolutionary. Equipped with R-4M air-to-air rockets, they could tear lanes of fire through bomber formations. On March 18, 1945, the heaviest raid on Berlin pitted conventional planes against these new jets and air-to-air missiles. In one engagement, the 8th Air Force lost 6 Mustangs and 13 heavy bombers to just 3 enemy pilots. But the jets had critical limitations: high fuel consumption, short operational ranges, and a vulnerable transportation system that hindered deployment. Allied fighter pilots engaged in rat-catching, patrolling German jet airfields to destroy planes during nature. Hitler's desperation led to the Sonderkommando Elbe, or werewolf operation, the suicidal ramming attack plan using air cadets against bombers. On April 7, 1945, 120 student pilots were unleashed against over 1,000 American heavies. At least 8 rammed bombers, but the Luftwaffe lost up to 3/4 of its fighters. The day of the Great Jet Massacre, on April 10, 1945, saw American air power destroy 284 German aircraft on the ground, including at least 25 jets. The Luftwaffe's operational jet fleet was decimated. The final heavy bombing mission of the 8th Air Force was on April 25, 1945. Raids on the Skoda works at Pilsen, Czechoslovakia, and railroad centers in Salzburg. The strategic air campaigns were ending, not for lack of will, but for lack of viable targets. May 1945, the end and its aftermath. As the Allied armies converged, the war's end brought a new set of horrors. On January 27, 1945, Hitler ordered the evacuation of POW camps ahead of the Soviet advance. This initiated the Blizzard March. 95,000 Americans, 38,000 of them airmen, were forced to march through the worst European blizzard in decades. They walked for weeks, sleeping on soggy ground, littered by the feces of dysenteric prisoners. They drank from ditches used as latrines, ingesting khaki-colored snow full of urine and bloody feces, leading to hepatitis and yellow jaundice. Sergeant Joseph O'Donnell recalled his day of reckoning on day 35, seeing a harried, starved, unshaven, skeleton reflection. The buddy system saved lives, sharing precious few resources. Along the route, POWs witnessed the systematic barbarity of the Nazi regime. Near Linz, they saw German soldiers herding hundreds of people onto the road, identifying them as Untermenschen. These walking skeletons were Jews and political prisoners. An SS officer shot 2 men who could not rise, one with a geyser of blood spurting from his head. This direct exposure to the Holocaust's victims transformed the POW's understanding. A profound sense of revulsion and fear replaced previous notions of their shared humanity with their captors. April 29, 1945. The Battle for Moosburg. As American forces advanced, John Egan saw Old Glory flying from the steeple of the village church. A Sherman tank smashed through the main gate of Stalag 7A. The announcement came, "I have come for my brother." The Nazi swastika was lowered. The stars and stripes raised. This was freedom. A truckload of real white bread appeared, tasting like cake. General George Patton arrived, vowing to kill these sons of bitches for this. But liberation was not always immediate or without further trauma. At Stalag Luftwaffe, nearly 7,000 men remained under the iron rule of Colonel Zemke. When Soviet soldiers liberated the camp, a drunken Cossack's declaration of freedom led to immediate anarchy. The camp went stark raving mad. In the vicinity, almost 24 German women were found strangled or shot. Germans, fearing their liberators, sought sanctuary with their former captives. This, something we never expected to see, as Airman Forrest Howell observed, was the inversion of roles, a chilling testament to the breakdown of order. Zemke negotiated with the arriving main body of the Russian force, organizing an airlift for 6,250 American airmen via flying fortresses. The price? The return of former Soviet commander Colonel Andrei Vlasov, who had fought for the Germans. This high-stakes geopolitical bargaining foreshadowed the coming Cold War. May 7, 1945, Cole. Gen. Alfred Jodl signed the act of military surrender at Eisenhower's headquarters in Reims. The next day, May 8, Victory in Europe Day. London exploded into a madhouse, a beautiful, beautiful madhouse. Piccadilly Circus was a conga line of jubilation. Yet, the landscape across much of Germany was one of utter destruction, desolation, and death. Berlin was a city of the dead, 70% destroyed. Cologne, 80% destroyed. Ursula von Kardorf, a German citizen, wrote in her diary, "We have lost the war, but if we had won it, everything would have been still more horrible than it is." The airmen who returned carried indelible scars. Many struggled with the war of the vegetative neurosis. the psychological toll of extreme combat. Even heroes like Robert Rosenthal, who returned to Europe to participate in the Nuremberg trials, confronted the legacy of war. He saw Nuremberg, 91% dead, and witnessed the profound lack of remorse among many Germans who attributed their downfall to losing the war, rather than the inherent wrongness of their actions. The US due par rather than the inherent wrongness of their actions. Strategic Bombing Survey concluded that while bombing had not caused a revolution, it brought home the full impact of war, leaving a lasting imprint for denazification. The world had witnessed a new scale of civilian mortality. 1.5 million deaths by bombs in World War. On September 17, 1947, the United States Air Force was officially established as an independent branch. It was a legacy forged in fire, innovation, and an immense human cost. The strategic bombing campaign against Germany remains a subject of intense debate. It was brutal, experimental, and deeply consequential. It blurred the lines between military necessity and terror. It challenged the ethical limits of warfare, and it irrevocably changed how wars would be fought and how their costs would be measured. Not just in victory or defeat, but in the enduring scars on landscapes and on the human spirit. These scars deepened with every sortie, every high-stakes mission. Early attempts to strike deep into the heart of the Third Reich were met with brutal resistance and immense cost. One such gamble, dubbed Tidal Wave, aimed to destroy Hitler's Black Gold. On August 1, 1943, the Ploiesti raid demonstrated an early, high-cost attempt to strike a vital target. Just weeks later, on August 17th, party end 1943, the Schweinfurt-Reidsberg raids marked a crucial period of intense losses for the 8th Air Force. With casualty rates over 18% in some formations, these missions forced a reassessment of strategy and tactics. Colonel Ben Lay Jr. S. personal report on the Regensburg mission captured the sheer terror. The unescorted bombers were vulnerable, but a critical change was coming. The gradual integration of long-range fighter escorts, particularly the P-51 Mustang, transformed bomber operations. Designed by Edgar Schmude, the P-51, with drop tanks, provided much-needed protection deep into enemy territory. General Doolittle's leadership in fighter escort strategy proved to be a true turning point. This wasn't just about defense, it represented a significant strategic pivot, the shift to a policy of gaining air superiority over the Luftwaffe. It moved beyond solely defensive escort missions towards sustained offensive operations. Luftwaffe losses in late 1943 became a critical turning point. October 1943 was a pivotal month. General Spaatz emphasized this, supported by General Arnold's pressure for aggressive action. This strategy culminated in the Big Week offensive of February 1944. Over 250 sorties by the 8th Air Force alone aimed to shatter German aircraft production. The consequences were profound. Significant damage to German oil production and industry began to take its toll. A 40% drop in oil output severely impacted their ability to wage war. Albert Speer himself noted the catastrophic blow of the bombing. Heavy losses mounted for both Allied air crews and German forces alike. Yet, the eventual achievement of air superiority over Germany was undeniable. This pivotal control of the skies paved the way for subsequent ground invasions and operations. The air war evolved. H-2X radar allowed for blind bombing, extending operations beyond clear daylight. Electrical suits and flak suits were introduced to protect aircrews from the harsh conditions and enemy fire. This re-evaluation of aerial warfare strategy moved towards a more integrated approach, combining bombers and fighters for maximum impact. It challenged the simplistic idea that strategic bombing was ineffective or solely a terror weapon. Instead, it detailed the dismantling of an enemy's capacity to fight. It was a Grant-like American strategy of annihilation, not just about destruction, but about systemic incapacitation.